Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to Adobe Live. My name is Howard Pinsky, Senior XD Evangelist here at Adobe, and I hope you're all doing well on this Friday afternoon. We made it through the week, and I'm excited to be back for another Masterclass. This is Masterclass number 24. We've been here for 24 weeks, which means there's 24 hours of free content for XD, which is great. That's on top of all the other content that we produce. Big hello to everyone tuning in live here on Behance. If you are watching on YouTube, head on over to behance.net/Adobe Live so you can watch along and chat with us live. We've got Umacorn and Neha and Nick, Anit, Philip, Vipin, Julia, Jack, Cody, who's in pajama pants. So am I, but I'm not going to stand up right now. Munir and Colby, great to see everyone. If you are tuning in live, let me know who you are and where you're tuning in from. These masterclasses, if you're brand new to this, are a little bit deeper than some of our other lessons, but it's a perfect opportunity to ask questions, get some tips and tricks, and hopefully get a little bit of inspiration along the way. Yeah, they've been 24 masterclasses. We are rocking, and there's no end in sight. We have a lot coming up over the course of the next few months. Of course, Adobe Max is, I don't know, October. When is that? I don't know how many days. We have got Bob Baker in the house. Welcome, Andre. Yeah, October and Adobe Max just around the corner. And we have some exciting stuff planned. And of course, there's going to be a lot of content. And Adobe Max this year is free, which is great. It's going to be all online. It's going to be all free. I'm going to be streaming into your faces. We've got a lot of people from the different teams streaming into your faces as well. But today is all about Adobe XD. So I'm going to hop over to my screen, and I'm going to start here on Dribbble just for a second. Because a few weeks ago, I posted this shot here, and I got some, did some experimentation with a Boop logo. Because as you might know, I'm a big fan of the Boop. Got to make those sound effects when you're designing, right? Otherwise, are you really a designer? Probably, but sound effects just make everything better. Thank you, Cody, for posting that Cotton Bureau shirt. Something else I did in my free time. I was bored, and booping is great. So I created this, and I'm like, where can I take this next? So maybe today, we're going to expand on this. I'm going to show you not only how this was done in Adobe XD, but also we're going to be creating some sort of a podcasting app. Because maybe, I'm a big fan of podcasting. I had a podcast before in the past. I might want to create another one. And maybe it'll be the Boopcast or something. Hey, Steven, welcome. So we're going to be building out that throughout the course of today's masterclass. And if it runs a little long, then we'll carry it over to next masterclass. No masterclasses without Boop. I agree, Vipin. All right, so we're going to hop over to Adobe XD. And let me actually hide this so we see just the splash screen. There we go. And we're going to start off super simple. We've got an hour. So again, if you have questions, throw them in the chat. I will be looking from time to time. So I'm going to start off, even though we're going to be starting with the logo on probably a bigger artboard, I do want to get some of my artboards set up. And I want to go big. iPhone 10R, 10s Max, or 11. It's a lot of models in one, but thankfully they all kind of use the same dimensions. So I'm going to choose that. New artboard is going to launch. There we go. And this is where the actual podcast application is going to go. And this will be probably the home screen. Actually, we're probably going to start with the loading screen eventually. So this is going to be the loading screen. And I'll pop that there. But before we get on to any of that, I do want to start building out that logo and show you how that was built. Start with an animation maybe. It's going to be a lot of fun. So over to the left, almost said right. I'm going to drag out another artboard. This one I'm not too concerned about the actual dimensions because it's not made for any specific device. It's more of like a design system, right? We may want to start design system, right? And this is going to be for the Boopcast, design system, whatever it might be. Munir says Boop class. Ooh, I like that. We can have a Boop class hosted on the Boopcast. That's just too much for me. All right. So a few things I want to lay out first are probably some of the colors that we might use. And if you saw on the Dribbble post, that yellow just kind of popped out really nicely. So maybe I just want to define what that might look like. And I'm going to go over here to my color picker and choose a yellow. I might want to introduce a little bit of orange in there. Ooh, look at that. Just a little bit of orange. You probably don't want to go pure yellow like that, because that'll cause a lot of clashing, especially if you are focusing on like accessibility. So introducing a little bit of orange really makes that yellow pop a little bit, and it'll help when you're putting on, white text or black text. Both of those should look pretty nice on top of this color. Vipin says maybe XD should introduce an audio clip sounding boop recorded by Howard that we can use in XD. That would be fantastic. I should just do like a sound kit, because now XD does support audio files. I can just, send that to all of you, and you can just do what you want with it within reason. All right, so we've got this yellow looking pretty good, and I'm going to drag out another one, and maybe this will be a darker color. And, I try to stay away from, the pure blacks. I like to just bring up the color just a little bit to introduce a little bit of gray in there. It kind of has a nice feel to it. Then, of course, we can introduce a few other colors, but for the most part, of course, a white would be nice, but maybe just a little bit of a gray, just like that. There we go. Vipin says, where's our reddish pink? You know what? I don't know if maybe it'll go. Let me actually do that. So the reddish pink is right about there, right? Maybe I'll bring out some of the saturation just a little bit. Hey, Kadima, welcome. And there we go. So we've got our colors set. Now, I do want to rearrange these colors a little bit, even though it doesn't really make a difference on the actual design system artboard. We can rearrange things in our assets panel. Just for my own sanity, I may want to rearrange these. So I'm going to group them very quickly. Command and Control G. And I can turn on the stack. One of the newest features in Adobe XD allows you to rearrange objects inside of a group. It did determine that this is a horizontal stack based on the elements inside it, and I can just, look at that, fancy. Now, do I want this on this side or this side? I don't know. Not sure. Philip is asking, what is the status of the map plugin? Ooh. So the map plugin is underway. It is very much in development. Walter, who is developing it, is in communication with our plugins team internally, which is great. And by the way, we do have a plugin fund. So if you want to apply for a grant and you have a really good idea for a plugin, you can do that. I don't have the website off the top of my head. Maybe one of the mods does, but you can do that. And Walter did that as well. And he's in communication with the team. He's developing the plugin. As many of you may have seen, I designed it live during one of the masterclasses, and it's going to become a reality. So it's really exciting. All right, so we've got all of our colors set, at least the colors that we're going to use right now. And I want to start adding them to our assets panel. So if I hop over, hey AJ from India, does XD support video in the future? It might. I don't have any updates on that, but I know it's something the team has been exploring. They want to make sure, especially with videos and GIFs, very large files and things that move, they want to make sure it doesn't affect performance, which those two things definitely would. So they want to get it right before introducing it, something they're definitely exploring. All right, so into the assets panel we go, and I've got the group with all the colors selected. Thank you, Tim, for posting that link. Hey Dana, welcome. So I'm going to go ahead and press the plus button beside colors. It's going to grab all the colors inside of that group and add them directly into my assets panel. And of course I can dive in here and rename these. So I'm going to call this Pinsky. Oh, I spelled my own last name correctly. I always do that. Pinsky Red. And I want to leave it up to you what these other ones are going to be called. This yellow, the darker and the lighter colors. Throw some suggestions in the chat specifically for the yellow, the yellowish orange one. All right, so we've got that looking pretty good. Now we want to move on to the actual logo. I'm not going to worry about the character styles just yet, but I want to touch on the logo and how that was done. So what we're going to do, we're going to start with the B, because that's the main important part of this logo, is the actual, the B of the podcast application. So I'm going to hold down my shift key and draw one out. I'm going to purposely make it a little bit larger. Of course, if I grab this and move it over here, it's going to be a little bit too large, but because it's going to be vector, I can always shrink it down later on. All right, so we've got our circle looking pretty good. I'm going to just change this to black for now. Mellow yellow. Ooh, name the yellow Boop-ish. Ooh boy, these are some pretty good colors. Sunshine for the yellow. Well, I kind of like sunshine. All right, I'm gonna go for sunshine, and maybe because I like Boop-ish, I'm gonna do that for the pinkish color. Boop-ish. Fancy. All right, looking good. So we've got this ellipse looking pretty fancy, right? And what we want to do now is cut out a hole in the middle of it. And there's two ways we can go about this. One, we can turn off the fill and actually just add a border and just increase the heck out of that border. We can do that, or we can also use a Boolean object. So if I duplicate, let me show you my layers panel. If I duplicate this existing shape, I'll change the color so we can see it, and I reduce the size, we've got something that looks like this, right? And now what we want to do is we want to knock out a hole of the shape in the back with the newly created shape that we created. So if I select both of them just like that, we've got our Boolean options right here at the top. We've got add, we've got subtract, we have intersect and exclude overlap. But of course we do want subtract, which is going to subtract, use the top shape to subtract a hole in the background. Boop, there we go. That looks pretty good. And what's nice is all of these Boolean objects are completely vector and editable. So I can dive in here, I can always grab this and make it a little bit larger, make it smaller if I wanted to. We'll probably make some changes to that as we go. Samir is asking, is XD planning for 3D or anything where it can help in creative websites? So 3D in specific kind of falls in the same lines as videos and GIFs. When you start introducing 3D objects, there's the possibility that performance will suffer. And the team, spends a lot of time making sure performance doesn't suffer. So maybe one day. There's not a huge need for that at the moment. Definitely go to adobeXD.uservoice.com, upvote some of those requests. The team really looks at some of that stuff and makes sure that they're tackling the feature requests that designers are really looking for. All right, so we've got our circle, which is part of the bee. And of course, we want that little stem. And there's a few ways to do it. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my rectangle and drag out something that looks kind of like this, right? I'm going to make it a little bit thicker, just like that. And that I'm going to line up with the bottom. Now this one, because it's the bee, it has a little bit longer stem on the left-hand side. So I'm going to push that up a touch. And I can round out the corners either completely or just a little bit, but let's go ahead and round them out completely. And I will choose the same black for the stem. Now, that doesn't look too bad, right? But we want to get a little bit fancy with this. So there's a few things we want to do to help us get fancy with this. What I'm going to do first is I do want to kind of cut out, I want to add a little bit of separation between the stem and the actual ellipse right here. And to help me do that, what I can do is I can grab this shape inside of the subtraction, which I'm going to call, let's say, body. I'm going to copy this. I'm going to paste it here and just enlarge it a little bit, just like that. And I can reduce the opacity so we can see how much we're going to cut out of that stem, right? So something like that, right? Maybe a little bit lower, right about there. And then very similar to what we did with the Boolean object previously, we can use this newly created shape to knock out, I'm going to, there we go. Right? So now we have this kind of stylized looking bee. And again, it's all editable. So I can dive in here and just make this bigger, make it smaller, whatever I need to do, I can do it. That looks pretty good, I think. I'm kind of digging it. What do you all think? Think it's good? I like it. Now, since this is focused on podcasting, maybe to get a little bit creative, we may want to add another element inside of this stem at the top to kind of make it look like a microphone. I think that could be fun. And because this is already a Boolean object, which I'm going to name stem, all we really need to do is just add additional elements in here. And it's going to use those elements at the top to knock out a hole in the background. So I can round this out just like that, right? And now we have sort of like a microphone thing going on. Yeah, Vipin. Vipin's liking it. There we go. So now if we take a look at what this looks like, you know what, I'm going to move this. And this, again, one of the benefits of working with these Boolean objects, completely editable. Look at that. Maybe I want to actually just drop this a little bit, just so it's not too tall. And move this down a touch. And, I say this all the time. I have a tendency to design very zoomed in. As you can see right now, I'm pretty zoomed in, right? And you lose track of the perspective of what this logo or whatever it is you're working on actually looks like. So you'll find me a lot just launching the preview, Command and Control Return, and it's going to open up this preview so I can kind of zoom out and see what it looks like. and make changes if I have to. You can also move the preview over to the side and continue working. So as I'm moving this along, I can kind of see both, side by side. Philip is saying, is it a common design rule to never go 100% black? I would say for the most part, I don't think there's a true reason for it. I just think it looks a little bit classier, just adding a little bit of gray in there. Not a lot, because then it gets a little bit muddy, but it seems to be pretty common across the industry to not go 100% black or 00000. Maybe if someone in the chat knows if there's like an actual technical reason for that, throw it in there, but not sure there is. So there we go. So we've got this pretty cool looking thing, looking pretty good. Almost looks like a microphone, right? I'm digging it. So we've got our B, and I'm going to make sure to group both of these elements and call this B. Simple, right? So we've got our logo looking pretty good. Now, what we might want to also do is we might want to create the entire word boop, right? So, we've got the foundation. We have basically all the elements that we're going to need to create the entire thing, right? So we have, if we dive into the B, we have the body, which we can now use as an O. So I'm going to call this O left, and we also have O right. And if you remember the boop logo, which is actually on my shirt right there, it looks very similar, at least the P and the B. So here we go. The P and the B look almost identical, right? And that's because they pretty much are identical. So if I just grab the B, drag this over to the right, call this P, what I can do now is this one doesn't need the microphone elements. So I can dive in here, just delete those, boop and boop. And for this one, all I have to do is grab the stem and move it on down, right? Just like that. And now we have a P. I'm gonna actually move it down a little bit more. We do want it to line up so it's consistent with the top of the body. Bam. Right about there. Look at that. Fancy, right? We've got this nice, bold, thick typeface that we're working with, and I think that's looking pretty good. Again, I want to preview it to see what things are looking like, and we can use responsive resize just to move some of these parts around if we needed to, and that's looking pretty good. Now, if you remember, in the dribble shot, we animated it, and some of you were asking how that was done. So there's two ways we can do this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep all of this on the design system, but I may just duplicate this down just so we can work on the animation separately. Hashtag Fancy Friday. I agree, Cody. So what we can do here, I want the B on top of everything. So I'm going to move it to the top of my layer stack right up here. And I want to move the O. I want to basically collapse all of these. So I'm going to collapse all three of these. There we go. And just use those alignment and distribution options at the top. I can also do the same for the P. Now what you're going to notice is that because the stem is a little bit different on the P, that we're seeing some weirdness going on, right? And I might also want to change the background color of this just so we get a real world view of what it's going to look like, just to our yellow. There we go. All right. So we've got that P and it's looking a little bit strange because again, the stem is looking a bit strange, but because we're working with Boolean objects, I can just move this up so that it's not in the way. Just like that. There we go. So now we just have the B that we can center in the middle of our document, and that looks pretty good, right about there. And now all we have to do with Auto-Animate or using component states is duplicate this artboard and design the final view, right? So I'll move the B over, I'll move the O right about there, grab that one, that's the P over there, right? And I'll want to dive in here and just grab the stem one more time. There we go, move this up a touch. Make sure it lines up really nicely. That's looking pretty good. Move this down. This one's gonna be a little bit longer because it is the longer stem on the P. There we go. And I'm simply going to move this in the center. Perfect. All right, so there we go. We have both views complete. We have the B on the left, and then it's going to transition to the actual Boop logo on the right. So now if I go to prototype mode, And we can do either a tap trigger or a time trigger on the entire artboard, completely up to you. I'm gonna drag this over to the right. We'll do a tap trigger and auto-animate for the type. We're gonna go to, let's go for in and out. And let's do a fairly quick duration, 0.6 seconds. And now when you press play, there we go, fancy. So that stem of the P kind of got a little bit longer as the animation was taking place. Now, you may be wondering, well, how do you do that fancy O thing that you showed on Dribble? So let me go ahead and show you that one more time. So that second O kind of did a little, right? And then it kind of went in. There's also a little period that goes, right? So we can do that as well. And let me show you how that's done. Back to XD. So in this case, what we want to do, because there are no, anchor points in XD, we kind of have to fake it a little bit. So this is what we can do. This O on the right, what we want is we want a larger circle to act as our anchor point. So if I go ahead and do this, I'm going to drag out a circle like this, position it somewhere, and this may require a little bit of experimentation, but we're going to run with this and see how this looks. Makes it a little bit larger, make sure it's centered, and we want to group the ellipse, this anchor, I'm going to call it anchor point, or just anchor, and the O on the right. I'm going to group that and I call this O right. There we go. And I'm also going to copy the anchor point over here and do the exact same thing. So I'm going to group these two. I'm going to, what am I doing? Command or Control G. And this would be O right. Got to make sure to spell it correctly. There we go. And move it down. Now, of course, we don't want this anchor point to be seen the entire time. So in that case, I'm simply going to grab it and turn the opacity down to 0 on both of these artboards. And what that's going to allow us to do, if I go ahead and show it just a little bit, that's going to allow us to actually rotate this O like that, right? So as it's coming out of the collapsed state on the left, it'll be able to rotate just like that. So this one, I actually want to rotate it about 180 degrees. I'm going to make sure to move it over here into place. There we go. Let's see what this looks like. Again, this may require a little bit of experimentation to get it right, but let's see. Okay, it did a thing, but I don't know if it was exactly the thing that I wanted it to do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move some of these around a little bit. Maybe I'll make the anchor point a little bit larger. Right? And I'll move it on over. Nope, that's definitely not what I wanted it to do. So what you can also do is you can delete it from here, and then you can copy and paste it. And I want to do 180. Oops, that's the wrong thing. Delete. And I'm going to copy it. I have two of them. Why do I have two of them? Copy and paste. There we go. And I want to rotate 180 degrees. Move this over, and let's see what that looks like. I mean, it's interesting. Again, you need experimentation to get this thing exactly right. But it's kind of interesting, right? It's not exactly what I wanted, but we can also play around with the anchor. We can move it to the center. See if that helps at all. Like that, right? And I got to move this one over to the center too. Boop. Let's see. Well, that one, obviously, because it's in the center, you get the idea, right? So experiment with these sorts of things. Use a larger shape as an anchor point, and eventually you'll get it right. But now that we kind of have the logo looking pretty good, we've got sort of an animation going on, we may want to start building out what the actual podcast app experience looks like. And Philip is asking, is there a way to move guides with the arrow keys like a shape? So I believe at the moment there is not. Oh, I see what I did, I think. So that's 0, and this is also, what happens if you try negative 180 degrees? I don't know, let's find out. Not that one. I think at the anchor point I messed up. So I'm gonna have to move the anchor point back. Move the anchor point back. I don't know. Again, experiment with these things, and eventually they will do what you want them to do. Let's see, -180. I love when the chat tries to give me suggestions that usually do end up working. Okay, I mean, it kind of did a thing. So we can experiment with that even more, maybe 90 degrees or 360 degrees, but I do want to move on to make sure that we touch on the actual podcast app experience. So there's a few things that I want on this particular application. Of course, the loading screen. And that one is going to be very simple, right? We basically want the logo to appear on the loading screen right over here, probably on that yellow background. So with that yellow selected, I can either just use my eyedropper tool or grab the color from the assets panel. I'm also going to grab my logo and paste it right about there. Make it a little bit smaller. Oops. Let me actually get rid of this anchor point, because we probably won't need that. There we go. Don't rotate the anchor point and try -180. Yeah, that might also work, Vipin. If I leave the anchor point alone and rotate all the other stuff. All right. There we go. And what I can do now is just start making some of these things smaller a little bit. All right, and then we've got that's the P. I'm gonna make this a bit smaller. And I think I'm running into some weirdness going on. Yeah, it knocked out that was weird. Okay, I'm gonna get rid of that. You know what, we probably don't even need these. There we go. We've got our lovely little logo, right? Time constraints do get in the way. I agree. I only have an hour for these sessions, but I do want to make sure to get through as much as possible. So we've got our B, make sure it's centered, and that's looking pretty good. And of course, you know, on the yellowish orange, we can either go white or we can go dark, right? I don't have a preference. Let me know in the chat which one you prefer. Do you like this color or do you like the dark? I can't figure out which one I want. I'm going to stick with this one just for now, because we're going to transition to the next artboard. And what I'm thinking for this other artboard, if I duplicate this over, I can move this logo up so it does transition a little bit up there, right? And because I'm designing for a modern iPhone, we have to keep in mind that we have a notch at the top right up here, and we also have a home indicator at the bottom. So you can't really have anything, it's like about 45 pixels from the top. So I'll position it right around there. So we've got the white, dark, dark. Light is hard to see. All right, so we will go for, let's go for the dark. Dark. Bam. Fancy. All right. Someone's asking why assets are missing from developer sharing. So it depends on the asset, but colors, character styles, and components should all be available. States within components are in the works, so those will be available at some point in the future. And then anything for images, for example, those you should make sure to mark. So if I want to make sure that this logo is available to my developers and it's not a component, right over here to the right of a layer, you've got the mark for export option. So go ahead and press that, or you can do that at the bottom of your properties inspector. That'll make sure that your developer has access to it. By default, not everything is available because we don't want to overload developers with every single layer on your design. So keep that in mind, that for things like images or logos, mark those for export and they should be available. All right, so we've got our logo kind of moved up here. And of course, once we get to auto-animating, you know, when we transition from this artboard to this, the logo is going to get a little smaller and whoop, kind of move on up. Now, right down below here, one thing that I love about, you know, applications, podcasts, there's so much content, right? And we want to be able to search for that content. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to just start by dragging out some guides just to help me line up things, about 32 pixels. From the left and the right. There we go. And I'm going to grab my rectangle tool and draw out a search bar just like this. And maybe I'll just round out the corners just a little bit. Let's say 8 pixels looks pretty good, possibly. I think so. I think 8 pixels could work. I'll position this, let's say 32 pixels from this logo at the top. And then inside here, I want to make sure that users know that this is a search field. So the first thing to let them know is an icon. So I'm going to hop over to my icons, my plugins panel, and I'm going to go with the icons for design plugin right over here. I'll just type in search, and one of my favorite search icons is from the Feather library. It's just a fun little icon. It's got a little tiny handle over there. It's just super nice, and I can make this a little bit smaller. And it is border based, so if I needed to make it a little bit thinner or a little bit thicker, I can very easily do that. You know, even though the logo is quite thick and we sort of want to pull inspiration from that over, you know, throughout the entire application, we probably don't want to go too thick for the search icon. Even though it's kind of fun, it kind of distracts the user's eye, right? They're going to keep looking at the search box. Even though it's a focus of the homepage, it shouldn't be the focus. So in that case, I'm going to just drop it back to about 3. AJ is asking, how did you create the second guideline? So I created them both exactly the same way. I hovered my mouse on the left-hand side of an artboard. You can also do it at the top. And I dragged one out to 32 pixels on this side, and then one out 32 pixels from the right. All right, so we've got our search icon looking good. And to the right, search podcasts. Now this one, I'm gonna go for, let's say, go for Sophia Pro. If you've been watching my streams, you know I have been using Sophia Pro quite a bit. And someone's asking, please add export options for assets from XD and send to developer as a zip. So, I mean, I don't know how many developers want zip files, but if they do, go to adobext.uservoice.com and submit that request. I do know that a lot of developers love the design specs that we provide. A lot of them don't like searching through zip files, but you can download all the assets from your design spec, from the XD design spec. So you can do that as well. All right, so let's go for maybe light, and then I'm going to just drop the opacity or drop the color so it's not super distracting. There we go. Looking okay. I may make some tweaks to that at some point in the future, but I'm kind of liking that. And the last thing I'm going to do is just to separate this particular search box from the background, I may want to add a little bit of a shadow. So I'm going to go ahead and with the search box selected, I'm going to add a shadow right down here. And you know me, I'm particular with my shadows. So I'm going to pull it out a little bit. And then I also want to make sure to blur it quite a bit. And then for this one, we might be able to get away with adding a little bit of color in there. So if I go ahead and sample the yellow that we're using, of course, that yellow is not going to work because it's the exact same color. But if I add a little bit of orange in there, just a little bit, maybe bring the opacity down just a touch, right? Then I can experiment pulling this out just a little bit more, maybe darkening this a touch. And just really dial that in. That might be a bit too much. But if we take a look at this in the preview, it's got a nice, very subtle shadow, right? AJ says, is Sophia Pro family paid? So I believe I downloaded or added from Adobe Fonts, which has a ton of different fonts in their typefaces in their library. Otherwise, I believe it is a paid font. It's a premium font. But if you do have a Creative Cloud subscription, Adobe Fonts is included. All right. Vipin says, some designers feel it's silly to provide search text fields in the search box. Instead, they just provide an icon and leave it. What are your thoughts? I can go either way, right? It depends. I like adding some sort of text because not everybody, most people do know what the search icon means. Not everybody does. So, adding some sort of copy in there, and of course this could be translatable. If this is a website, it's good for SEO possibly. And, I just find that with nothing there, it's a little bit too plain. I just want to add a little bit of information in there. And that's kind of why I dropped the color a little bit, so it's not like super strong. It's just there. It fills up that space just a touch, right? But, it could go either way. It's kind of clean and minimalistic like this. And of course, if that's the direction your app is going in, then that could be interesting, right? But I'm going to leave that at that for now. Now, down here at the bottom, we may want some sort of a navigation bar. So for that, I'm going to grab my rectangle, drag out a navigation bar right down there. And maybe I want the corners rounded just a little bit. So I'm going to round them out. Let's say about 24 pixels, looks pretty good, but I don't want the bottom corners rounded. So I'm gonna hold down my Alt or Option key and just bring those back in. Someone's asking, can we add a sign up form on there? We could. I'm not sure if I would add a sign up form on this particular experience, mainly because I want people to just dive in and listen to the podcast, right? Of course, if this is something like Spotify or SoundCloud or any of those large services, then you probably want a sign up form. But as far as I'm concerned, I just want people to open the app and be able to listen to the podcast as quick as possible. All right. So we've got that there, and I keep seeing suggestions come in for XD. Again, go to adobeXD.uservoice.com. The team is reading that all the time. Make sure to submit or upvote your requests. All right, so we've got our navigation bar. That's looking pretty good. Now, of course, we want some icons. Now, on a podcast application, specifically, a personalized podcast application, there may not be very many options down at the bottom. So you could possibly get away with no navigation bar at all. But I'm going to go ahead and open up my Nucleo app, which is a third-party icon manager, just to get some additional icons in there. Of course, we can use the icon plugin that I showed earlier, but let's go ahead and find some icons. I'm going to type out home. It's 1 a.m. in Bangladesh. Thank you for joining me so late or early in the morning. I'm awake just to watch this masterclass. Thank you. I appreciate that. This home icon is kind of fun. I'm going to drag that in there. And this is also a border-based icon, so I can control the border and the thickness if I needed to. Let's go ahead and bump this up, let's say to 32 pixels. That looks pretty good. And then we might want some sort of a playlist icon. Let's see. Got a bunch of different icons. Let's see, what else can we add? Maybe a profile. I'll come back to the playlist in a second. And this one is actually going to be user. And this one looks pretty fancy. And one more time, I'm going to turn off responsive resize so the border doesn't get skewed a little bit. Bump this up to 32. And let me just double check which icon I used. Yeah, it was a playlist icon. Okay. So going back to Nucleo, let's see, I forget which one I used. It probably doesn't matter, does it? Or album, possibly? There's a lot of different options. We can use this one here. Let's say list. As you start adding icons to your libraries, you can just you can go crazy. So someone's asking, is Nucleo free to use? So the actual application is free to download. They do have their own icon library, which I have not purchased yet. I believe it's $99, only because I already have many icon libraries loaded in here. But if you already have your icons, just want to load them in an application, then yeah, I believe Nucleo is free to use. All right, I can't find the one that I want. Oh, here it is. This is the one I wanted. I'm going to drag this one in as well. Now I don't want the music icon in the center of it. So thankfully these icons are vector, so I can just dive in here and delete these two elements. And of course I could put a microphone icon in there if I wanted to, but I kind of like the minimalistic look of that one. So let's bump this to 32. Bump the border, there we go. And what I want to make sure to do is line these up. So this is about 42 pixels from the right. Let's go for about 48. And then I'm going to do the same thing for this one. There we go. And I want to make sure now all of these are aligned easily. So Vipin says, I think there's a lip sync issue. So go ahead and refresh the page. I've noticed that on the Adobe Live landing page. I think it's a YouTube problem. Go ahead and refresh the page and it should be okay. All right, I'm going to go ahead and line these up just like that and make sure they're aligned in the horizontal center as well. Samir is saying, I appreciate you answering every question asked by people. You're welcome. I try to do my best. It's hard to pay attention sometimes, but I love the community just hanging out with me every Friday. All right, so we've got these icons looking pretty good. And we might want some sort of an indicator as to which specific page that we're on. And for that, we're going to keep things very simple. I'm going to grab an ellipse, drag one out. 10 pixels looks pretty good. And just fill that with yellow and just kind of place it about 8 pixels below the active icon. Now, of course, there are many ways to indicate which screen you're on, right? You can fill in the icon. You can make the border thicker. You can drop the opacity of the inactive icons. There's a lot of different ways you can do it. In this case, I'm just choosing to do a little small, maybe I'll go 8 pixels. There we go. When resizing icons, should you resize width only? I don't think there's a defined rule. I just did it just because I want the width of the icons to look fairly consistent. Sometimes height is probably a good way to go, but it's up to you or your developers. Definitely sync with your developers. All right, let's see how things are looking. Ooh, I like this. This is clean. I think that yellow really works. I think those border-based icons on the bottom are looking pretty fresh. I'm not always sold on border-based icons, but I think in this case, they're nicely spread apart, and I think they might work. Now, of course, depending on your application, depending on what content you're serving, you may also want to put text labels below these icons. Sometimes that's personal preference. If you know your audience is going to be international and you want different copy on some of them, that might be an option as well. But for this, I'm going to leave it as is. I'm going to group these elements and call this navigation. All right. The next thing we might want are some sort of like an album view. Maybe we want the initial or the newest playlist nice and centered, and then maybe we want like a card view going downwards. So for that, I'm going to grab a rectangle one more time. I'm going to draw one out. Maybe I'll make sure it's nice and square, so I'm holding down my shift key, and just to keep consistency with the search bar, I am going to round out the corners by 8 pixels and turn off the border. Perfect. All right, that's looking pretty good. So we've got our first playlist card, and maybe I'll just go ahead and write latest episode. And for this one, because it's a title, sort of like an H1, right? We may want to get a little bit fancy with our typeface. So I'm going to go for the Babus New Pro typeface. And let's try semi-expanded extra bold. Make this a little bit larger. And maybe I will uppercase it. And also play around with the line height. A lot of different things you can play around with. But, extra bold. Let's see what expanded. Nah, it's a bit too expanded. So I'll probably go with semi-expanded or just the super condensed. No, I'll leave it at that. That's looking pretty good. All right, so we've got one card looking fancy. We also want a few additional ones going kind of cascading behind it. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to just move this over a little bit. I'm going to make sure to group these two cards. And of course, you can imagine that, eventually there'll be some sort of an image in here to kind of brighten things up a little bit. So we have this looking pretty good. I'm going to duplicate this card, Command and Control D, and I'm going to move it downwards a little bit. Maybe 20 pixels and below. Now, to create that cascading effect, what we can do is we can bring this card inwards a little bit and then drop the opacity a touch, and then also add a little bit of a shadow. So that's the course of action right now. So for this, we've got 350 for the width, right? I want to just kind of bring it in by about 20 pixels. So what you can do in the Properties Inspector is you can actually do some math equations. If you're not good at math like I am, just do 350 minus 20 and it resizes beautifully, right? And there it is. I'm going to bring it in, make sure it's below. That looks pretty good. And I'm just going to drop the opacity. So this one, I'm going to drop it to about 80%. I'm just pressing the 8 key on my keyboard. Now, to create a little bit of separation between these two specific cards, I may want to add a little bit of a shadow. So I'm going to go ahead and select this rectangle, add a shadow. Again, I'm particular about my shadows, so I'm going to pull it out a little bit and blur it quite a bit. And I can also maybe introduce a little bit of color. Not a lot, you don't want to go too crazy, but just a little bit of color just like that, and maybe increase the opacity a touch. Now, as we start adding additional cards, this shadow may look a little bit different, so we may have to go back and change it, but we're going to see how this looks. And I can also apply it to this shape right here. All right, so we've got card number 2 looking pretty good. I also, you know what? I might want to bump the rounded corners just by a little bit. Just double that to 16. All right, now I'm kind of noticing that the shadow, I don't know if I'm liking it too much. I don't know how I feel about that. We'll see. I think once we start adding additional cards, someone says, what's the shortcut for 100% opacity? So that should be just 0. And if you press 0 twice, it's 0% opacity. So let's add one more card. I'm gonna start by dropping the size by 20 pixels one more time. Make sure this lines up. And 1, 2, 3, move it behind. And then I'm going to drop the opacity from 80% maybe down to 60%. Again, to create a little bit more of that depth. And I can continue this process for a few more cards. Minus 20. Move that down. 1, 2, 3, move it behind. And let's do one more. Minus 20. 1, 2, 3, and whoop, there we go. All right, that's looking interesting. So now that we have this kind of fun cascading effect, now this one at the bottom, we may not need a shadow because it's the last one down there. Hey Jack, welcome. You finally made it to one of these live streams. Awesome. And if anyone is coming in late and you want to rewatch it, if you feel comfortable now, you can always scrub back on YouTube, or you can wait till this is over and rewatch it once this is finished. All right, let's see how this is looking. Okay, so I'm definitely noticing that these shadows are a little bit too harsh right now. So let's go ahead and tweak these a touch. I may just bring down the opacity to like 10%. That's looking pretty good. So I'm gonna select all of these and just bring down the opacity. I'm holding down my Command key and Shift and clicking on all the other cards inside of their groups to select them. And that's looking a little bit better. Probably not perfect, but it's definitely looking better. I'm going to group all of these and just call these cards. Move these up a touch. And there we go. Things are looking pretty good. Now, of course, like I mentioned, once you start adding images into these particular cards, so let's say, for example, I go to Finder and I've got an image over here that could work, right? Possibly this one could work. It's, you know, the yellow background could clash a little bit with everything else, but once you start adding images in here, it's going to give you your application a completely different look. Let's see what other images I might have. Let's look for some colorful images. Maybe it's a podcast about ice cream. I don't know, right? Look at that. Look at that fanciness. I don't know if I like the blue on the yellow. So that, you know, that's one of the tricky things about working with such bright colors is that, you know, they clash a little bit. So in this case, what you could do is you can add a little bit of a border on the inside, right? Something like this, possibly. You can even drop the opacity of the border just to give it an interesting look, just to kind of separate it from, there's our beard guy. Yes, I use that beard guy in a lot of different videos. And he's also on a yellow background. You know what? That kind of looks, I don't hate it. Now for this one, because it's a yellow background on the image against the yellow background, for the particular shadow, I may want to tweak that a little bit. A podcast named The Scoop. Ooh, I liked it. Or Scoop Boops, or Boop Scoops. I don't know. Maybe. Kind of works. For this one, I might want to blur it a little bit more and maybe even reduce the Y value, just so that some of that shadow can bleed at the top as well. So I'm going to blur this a touch more, right? And you're noticing, it's hard to notice, but we're adding a little bit of shadow around the entire side, right? I can bump up the opacity just a little bit. And now we have a little bit of separation, as you can see. And here I can probably add on a little bit more color. I can sit here and tweak shadows for an entire hour. But that's looking pretty good. And then I can maybe add, let's say, do I want another yellow background down here? Maybe not. Maybe we want a pink or a blue. Of course, these images probably don't make much sense for podcasting, but you know, we can run with it and see what happens. I think that yellow is going to clash too much. Let's go for the pink. Oops. Interesting. I'd probably have to play with the opacity, but you know, the beard guy needs a job on the XC team. I know, I've used him so much that he might need to get hired. All right, so oh boy, I have like 6 minutes left. Okay, so this is looking pretty fancy. I'm liking the way this is looking, but of course, what we want to do is we want to be able to transition from this artboard here, or this artboard here, the loading screen, over to this specific one here. Here's how this is going to work. Because we're going to be using Auto-Animate, we want to make sure that all of these elements are also present on this artboard. And just to make my life a little bit easier, I'm going to group all of these elements. I'm going to call this app. And this will allow me to actually move the objects off of the artboard and not have them switch onto the pasteboard. So to do that, I'm going to grab all the elements that I haven't, everything but the B, because I want the B to kind of remain intact. I'm going to paste these all into a group called app. Of course, you can name this group whatever you want. Cody says, Howard losing track of time working on shadows. Classic. It happens all the time. Now, what I want to do is I want to move some of these elements off the artboard. So I'm going to move this down, and I want to move these cards. How do I want to do this? Maybe I want to get fancy with this, because that's what we're all about, right? In the last 5 minutes, 4 minutes, let's get fancy. So this one, I might want to rotate and kind of fly in like that. Maybe this one is going to, of course, it's going to look a lot better with actual images, but that's fine, right? Rotate this one, move this. This one I'm actually going to rotate a little bit more and move it out a little bit more. This one, same deal, right? And then this one over here. There we go. And then this guy up here, the search area, I'm going to move up. And now we're left with a pretty blank looking loading screen, right? Now, of course, because we made sure to name everything the same, all the elements are on both artboards, Auto-Animate should work beautifully. Here we go. So we're going to go into prototype mode right here at the top, and we are going to create a time transition, because essentially we want the loading screen to show up, and then after a set amount of time, the transition is going to take place. So I'm going to grab this handle with the artboard selected, move it on over to the second screen. We're going to go for a time trigger, which again is only available on an artboard level. We're going to give it a little bit of a delay because we do want to show the particular logo for a few seconds, and in practicality, in the background, the actual content is probably loading in. So we'll go for, let's say, 0.8 seconds. We do want Auto-Animate selected, and if you're brand new to XD, XD is going to look at the differences between all the elements on both artboards, and it's going to animate the changes when the transition is taking place. We'll try ease in and out, and let's say 0.6 seconds. All right, are we ready for this? Here we go. So I'm going to press play, and it's going to show the logo for about 0.8 seconds, and then the animation will kick off. Hopefully all goes well. Oh, helps if I select the right artboard. Awkward. Here we go. Ah, it worked. Look at that. Let's do that one more time. Command and Control, return. That is fancy. I'm liking that. What do you all think? And you can get even fancier if you wanted to. So on this first artboard, right, I can go ahead and, Cody says, drum roll. I can move some of these icons a little bit. So I can just move these outwards, move this outwards a little bit, move this one outwards. That way there's just a little bit, did you see that? There's just a little bit of animation down there at the bottom where the navigation bar is. Move it out a little bit more. Yeah, chat's loving it. Me too. You know, when I created this, the preview earlier today, I didn't think to do these little fan motions. That just came to me while I was designing, and I think that turned out really nicely. Yeah, there we go. And of course, there's so much more we can do with this application, including, you know, showing what the screen looks like when you actually play, adding a play button, for example. What does the search experience look like? Maybe I will expand on this in a future masterclass. But as always, a big thank you to everyone who has joined me today and in every single masterclass. Make sure to follow me on all the different platforms, Twitter, Facebook, not so much Facebook. I don't care about Facebook, but There's my thing down there, Twitter and Dribble. It's at Pinsky, Behance case study as well. So follow me on all the places. Stay tuned for Nick and Andrew coming up in just a few minutes. And then in an hour, I'm going to be back with the Anhit and Jonathan and Cody and Vipin and Philip and Munir and Ariana and Zabid and everyone else tuning in. Follow me on MySpace. Yes, Arthur, follow me on MySpace. And I will see you all, well, if you're participating in the challenge, in just about an hour. Thanks, everyone. See you next time.